Thank you all so much for joining this presentation entitled TELS and SEL, Traditional, Tradigital, and Digital Projects for Helping Students Process Pandemic Thoughts, Emotions, and Experiences. Even if all the ideas in this presentation may not be new to you, my hope is that you will all leave with some good ideas and some good research and some things to really think about regarding your students for this upcoming school year. I'm Dr. Trina Harlow from the University of Central Arkansas, where I'm an assistant professor of art education. I also serve on the board for Arkansans for the Arts and the National Art Education Association's National Board of Directors as Higher Ed Division Director-elect. And I'll be in that particular position for the next 4 years. So let's get started with some TELS and SEL. I would just like to jump right in and visit with you about social emotional learning, or SEL, as it is commonly referred to in education circles and elsewhere. By now, most teachers are familiar with SEL, but occasionally I run into some that are not, and sometimes I cross paths with teachers who know what SEL stands for and have a pretty good idea of what it means, but are not aware of CASEL and the SEL competencies. So let's visit a little bit about this and set the tone for everything we're going to discuss today in this presentation. CASEL, or the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, defined SEL more than 2 decades ago. And today, they are really the recognized leaders in the field. They are a trusted source for knowledge about high quality, evidence-based social and emotional learning, and that is right from their website. They support us as educators, they are educators, and they really are a voice for the fact that much more goes on in educational environments than academics. Now, for SEL, what is it? Well, social and emotional learning is an important part of our development as humans. It is an important part of education. You've all heard that saying, the teachers you remember are the ones you knew cared about you. You've heard the saying that you may not remember all of your teachers, but you remember how they made you feel. You've all heard that saying that there is so much more to school than reading, writing, and arithmetic. There is. We know that. You know, I remember what I learned in school as a child and adolescent, but I don't remember specific worksheets or tests or chapters in some of the textbooks or books I read. I don't even remember all of my art projects, some, but not all. Yet I do remember Mrs. Walk and how much she made me work, but how much I knew she also cared. I remember Mr. Hussey and how fun he made science come alive for me. I remember Mr. Loddick spending so many hours outside of school as our coach for our debate and competitive forensics team. I remember the people. I remember the emotions. I remember the really good days and experiences, and I remember a few bad ones too. Though Kasel's work is ongoing, they have identified knowledge, skill, and attitudes that help young people develop healthy identities, manage their emotions, and achieve goals, both personal and collective, and feel and show empathy for others. Establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make caring and responsible decisions. SEL advances relationships. SEL advances educational equity and excellence through genuine, real, authentic environments and experiences that display trusting relationships, meaningful curriculum, and where evaluation is ongoing. SEL gives us a mechanism to address various forms of inequity and empower young people, teachers, and all of us to work together to create schools that don't just exist, but thrive and are safe, healthy, and equitable, and just communities. As many of us also did in 2020, CASEL took a look at SEL and worked to make sure that SEL was squared firmly in equity. CASEL reminds us that for SEL to be effective, it needs to be implemented across schools and districts, states, regions, and across practices and policies, across curriculum and instruction, extracurricular activities, discipline, support services, professional learning, and assessment practices. SEL cannot just be practiced. in the art room and nowhere else in the school. It truly is a collaborative effort. Research by Durlock and others shows us that when schools and districts focus on SEL, student achievement goes up by 11% and pro-social behaviors are increased. Things like kindness, sharing, empathy, and that student attitudes toward school get better, that depression and stress levels go down. Research shows this, so let's take a look for ways to implement this in the art room. As far as our students, the CASEL 5 are 5 areas of competence that we should have as goals for our teaching and learning. They can be taught across all ages and diverse cultural contexts. The first one is self-awareness. This is the ability to understand one's own emotions, thoughts, and values, and how they influence behavior across contexts. Social awareness is the second one. This is the ability to understand the perspectives of and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and contexts. Responsible decision-making. This is the ability to create caring and constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions across diverse situations. Self-management. This is the ability to manage one's own emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, so important, effectively in different situations and to achieve goals and aspirations. And relationship skills. This is one of the green pieces of the circle. This is the ability to establish and maintain healthy, supportive relationships and to effectively navigate settings with diverse individuals and groups. So that's a little bit about CASEL and SEL. So now let's transition into how we can incorporate SEL in the school art classroom. The rest of this presentation is about this very thing. In our school art classes, we have an opportunity to both informally and pragmatically build SEL skills in our students in and through helping them appreciate the nuances of art by attending to the way in which emotions are expressed in their paintings, sculptures, and drawings, photography, etc. And as art teachers, we can build many of the SEL competencies by helping our students observe, analyze, and understand art and its production and context. And interestingly, by building students' SEL capacities, we often increase their appreciation and participation in the arts. So let's discuss art a bit more. First of all, school administrators were telling us prior to the pandemic, even being a thought in anybody's mind, that anxiety in young people was higher than they had ever seen in their educational service. This is all documented in research and publications such as EdWeek. We knew there was a problem prior to COVID, so I doubt this anxiety has gone away. And this makes me wonder if what we will see in August after everyone has had the summer off will still include this anxiety, or will this anxiety be more? As teachers, we know we are to focus on the holistic education of the whole child. Holistic education is really and truly pretty much social emotional learning. It's a comprehensive approach to teaching where educators seek to address emotional, social, ethical, and academic needs of students in an integrated learning format. Holistic projects often include or apply critical thinking skills and real-world problem-solving skills. That was a mouthful. The whole child approach in education is very similar. It is basically that in each child's school community, we deserve to be healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged. So essentially, we can combine the SEL approach, the holistic approach, and the whole child approach. And if we apply some common sense, we end up with an approach that cares about each and every student and what they're going through in their life and what they need to be successful. We care about how they treat each other, and we care not only about their academics, but also their decision-making, thoughts, emotions. We care about them. This is where art comes in. Art is the perfect setting to tell tales, to tell our stories. In fact, isn't that what the arts really are all about, the visual arts? Isn't art truly an artist telling a story they want to tell? We tell these stories visually, we tell them verbally, and I like to say we tell them visually, where the visual and verbal work together to tell our tales and stories. We don't have to be experts to give students an opportunity to explore their tales and stories. We just need to plan school art projects that give them an opportunity to say what they need to say. As Dr. Eisner said, give them a place to say through their art making that which cannot be said. Research tells us that all a child needs to be successful in this world is to know that one person loved them or cared about them. Research also tells us that when a young person has an opportunity to tell their story to even one other person, healing begins. So we art teachers are not therapists, nor should we try to be. That's a licensed medical field. I find this past year was often reminding art teachers of that. We are not allowed to practice art therapy. We're really not even allowed to use those words. But every single one of us art teachers know that the first week we teach, the first week out of school, and the first week we have our classroom, we know that we notice that our students tell their stories and share things going on in their lives, sometimes hard things, in the art they make, because that's what people do. There are purists in art education that think that art education should be about line, form, shape, color, and so on. There are purists in art education that think that every art lesson should have a tie to art history. One of the best things about being an art teacher is that we have the opportunity to plan our curriculum and instruction in a way that we feel is best for our students, school, and communities. Of course, following our state standards and our district guidelines. My professional philosophy of art education is that it's a big house and there's room for everything and everyone to share their thoughts and feelings in their artwork. Some of our students may do this without our help, but some may need our help, our setting the stage to do so, or they may stay bottled up about their pandemic experience, their experiences because of racial inequities of this past year and life, because of the election, because of how frustrated this past year was. By planning ahead to give our students an opportunity to tell their stories, we give them, through art, a place for hope, honesty, and healing to happen. I'm going to show you some examples of art projects that you can use or adapt or be inspired by to create your own. We will move through them pretty quickly, but remember, you can watch this presentation again. Here are some things to think about, some ways to incorporate SEL into your curriculum as you plan each project. Some ideas for projects are that you can teach young children SEL by teaching them vocabulary for emotions and feelings, by planning this into your art projects. Words such as good, bad, sad, mad, and then expand their SEL vocabulary through other art projects to focus on words like happy, surprised, worried, afraid, upset, proud. Incorporate children's books and literature into art projects that explore feelings. With older students, examine paintings and discuss the story in the painting. Then have students use some of the components of the painting to do their own painting that contemporizes what they viewed to their own lives. Before we move on, I want to address what is sometimes a debate in art education. I've already mentioned art teachers who are purists in differing approaches, and that's okay. Some in art education want to keep the focus on art for art's sake. You've heard that saying before, right? I don't think that a focus on all of the SEL competencies is for each and every art teacher. But I would suggest that even the media and skill purists in art education just attempt to investigate even one SEL competency. To me, the way I see it, it is just teaching our students to be responsible, caring human beings. I've always thought that should be a part of education. How do our students incorporate their tales and stories into the art they make? Why do they incorporate it? We have discussed some of this already, but art gives thought and emotion a place to be unleashed or unmasked. Students can tell their stories privately so that they're the only one that knows what their artwork represents or symbolizes, or they can share that story within the art with others. We have already discussed that by telling their tales and stories, young people begin healing if healing is needed. This is research proven. Through art, we give them several ways to tell their stories, through the visual, the verbal, and the vervisual. We also give them a place to feel comfortable sharing their culturally relevant, culturally reverent, and culturally sustaining stories of self. We give them a place to share their biopsychosocial stories, bring their biographies into our classrooms, their psychologies, their sociologies. Through Dr. Socorro Herrera's biography-driven instruction approach to education, or BDI as it's known, we give all children, all young people in our classes a way in which to belong and a way to personalize their art making with their story. Finally, there are endless, literally endless possibilities for art projects with a variety of medias that we can use to do all this. The important point, I believe, for the fall of 21 is give students an opportunity to share their tales and stories. Some will share about butterflies and bugs and Fortnite. Some will share of sadness and fear. Some will tell you something they want you to know about this past year or their lives in general. Whenever I discuss this with teachers who attend my various workshops or with my pre-service teachers, I always caution teachers that if you're going to do projects like this, that if you're going to ask students to incorporate emotion, if you do ask them that, if you're incorporating SEL strategies and hoping that some of this storytelling is revealing in artwork, if you're going to do any of these things, even in just normal, everyday, regular artwork that you do, I caution teachers, you have to make sure that you really take time to look at the artwork and analyze it. Have a conversation about it if you need to with a student. Be prepared to discuss anything that you may need to with the school counselor or the principal, because remember, you are not an art therapist. If you give students an opportunity to write an artist statement about their work, make sure you're not too busy to read every single word. What if that was the one time a student was brave enough to share something with you, a trusted teacher, and you missed it? And remember that small group sharing can be good for students. Whole class sharing can be really hard for students who really want to share something that's difficult. Remember these things. I think it will really be good to remember these things the first couple months of the upcoming school year. While in art education, we may want to fully discuss SEL and decide if we want to incorporate it or not, and whether or not we should even broach these SEL topics in art. One thing we can be sure about is that storytelling is always present in art making. You know, one reason SEL is important to me is because I was that kid. I was that kid who had things going on at home, but everyone thought I had a perfect life. And I knew at school that school was my outlet. I knew that working hard was my outlet. I knew that art was my outlet when I lived a roller coaster at home. And I think that's one reason why it's been so important to me as the founder of Online Art Teachers K-12 to remind teachers often that we're struggling with situations with parents, with students during the pandemic and so on, to remember that those students and their families were also going through struggles, and those struggles might just affect their school performance and the way in which they interacted with teachers. For me, it made me work harder. It made me make better grades. It was my outlet, school and my art making. And isn't that just a great segue? So let's turn to the art making right now. So before I show you some projects that I think will be good for you to use with your students in the upcoming school year, especially as school begins, I really think it's important that we give students an opportunity to share what's inside of them, and then we can move on to the other content that we want to teach. But I think we're all going to need some time to share what we've been through and what we're feeling, memories, experiences. But first, I want to show you a few products that I really like. You may be familiar with them. You may not be familiar with them. These are photo transfer products that I use. And on this first slide on the right, you see STEAMAseam 2, Light STEAMAseam 2. It's one of my favorite products. It's a fusible web, a little bit like something we all use called Wonder Under. So I came across these products as a part of my fiber arts work, but I have learned that they also work for working with paper. So keep that in mind. You'll find all of these products I'm about to show you in the Notion section of the sewing department at your craft stores, and of course at sewing stores. But STEAMAseam has fusible web on both sides. The package has directions. You can take a photo print it off, and you can use steam a seam to iron that photo onto anything. You can iron anything onto anything with it. But over here in these envelopes are some of my favorite products also, because these are, this is a fusible web piece, but these two are fabric pieces that you literally run through your inkjet printer. And so you can print your photos or quotes, any artwork, you can print it, and then you can use the fusible backing to iron it onto paper or a fabric fiber project you're doing, or you can use it to sew into a quilt if you're into that. But the thing that I like about these is you can take anything you've made, take a photo of it, print it, and incorporate it into your work. And you're going to see some fiber art I did in one of the projects where I did that very thing. These are some other brands of basically the same fusible webbing that you can use to attach fabric to fabric, but you can also use it to attach fabric to paper, fabric scraps to paper. And then on the right, you see a dissolvable stabilizer that you can use when students are hand sewing. If it's too flimsy for them, you soak this in water and it dissolves. You couldn't use this on paper because you have to soak it in water for it to dissolve. And then there's a plethora of other products available to us. This is artist transfer paper. It's an iron-on image transfer. You could use this again for the same thing, and you get a nice quality on your photos with this. In the middle are some products that are available to help you have students transfer. Perhaps they take a digital photo and they break it out into sections and use Google Draw, for instance. And then you want them to then print that and then turn that into a traditional artwork. So wouldn't that be interesting? We're thinking about doing artwork in Google Draw, but what if we take something we make in Google Draw and now we want to make it in a tactile art material, such as paper or fabric? We can use these two products to transfer that Google drawing on, cut the pieces out, make our patterns, and then reassemble it all with traditional materials. So these are just a few products I wanted to show you. Prior to the pandemic, for 6 years, I taught elementary education majors in a course called Art for Elementary Schools, and I coordinated the Art Ed program. I taught them to do tradigital art, where we combine traditional and digital art into one project. I've taught them to combine their use of traditional art with online digital platforms such as Skype in the classroom or social media to partner with schools in other parts of the world. And I facilitated those partnerships through projects I led, like the Worldwide Color Wheel Project, which you might have seen in School Arts Magazine. I also taught them how to combine traditional art media with digital art media in the same artwork through just various steps back and forth. Now, with a year pandemic teaching behind us all, I'd venture to say we're all pretty good at all three now. So as we go through these projects, just think about how you could do the projects I show you with traditional media or digital media, or combining traditional and digital into tradigital. You are creative human beings. You're the most creative human beings I know as art teachers. Let what I'm going to show you spark ideas for your own class. This student's work was called A Frog in My Throat. My students were asked to do 4 fiber arts projects last semester, beginning with a smaller project, which you see on the left, which is a story square. This was all fiber arts. And then moving into a felted hood, then moving into the bottom right, which is a wall hanging. And then finally, their last piece was supposed to be embellished clothing. And so, as I said, this was a fiber arts project, but they were to tell a story. And the reason I designed this project the way I did was because I felt like the fall semester had been pretty hard for my students. And so I decided to give my fiber arts students an opportunity to just share something that they might need to share or want to share. Maybe they just wanted to approach something lighthearted and fun, or that involves something that they really enjoy about life. Or maybe there was some emotion dwelling up in them, building up in them that they wanted to share, that they needed to get out. And this particular student, a future art teacher, she decided to approach this series of projects and focus on a personal issue to her, and that is being uncomfortable speaking in groups. And she knows as a teacher that that's something she'll be doing every day. I have a feeling that when it is something that she does every day, she will be absolutely fine with it. But she started off with the project on the left, and it was titled "A Frog in My Throat." And you can see right here, there's a little frog deep in her throat. And the whole piece is based around that. And in our critique in class, she shared what this piece meant to her. Then she moved into a felted hood project. Students were all asked to do a needle felted hood and just be creative with it and do whatever they wanted. And the entire class adored how her project turned out. We were all in awe of it. This giant frog head really gave the feeling of a frog. And when she had it on in class and she wore certain clothing with it, as she did in our final critique, I couldn't help but think how she had really brought the frog to life. And I believe that one of the points of the second project was that the little frog in her mouth was growing, and she was growing in her ability to speak in front of groups and kind of claim the frog, not hide it, but claim it publicly. Here on the bottom right, you see a wall hanging that she did as her third project, and the blue and white represents the water and sky. These green tufts are weavings of green with raya knots, and they represent the frogs in the water on the lily pads. And then she took the project to the final step with this embellished denim shirt, and it was loaded with positivity, her claiming that she was an overcomer. And when she stood up in front of class at our final critique and presented this, I was so proud of her because I had taught her in the fall and I saw the transformation. I saw her focus on something that was difficult for her with the first piece. You know, being public about the fact that speaking in front of groups was hard for her, and she's going to be a teacher. And then as she completed these various frogs, her thoughts developed, and she wrote about each step in an artist statement. And so this is the kind of SEL project that you can do with your students. Fibers are very therapeutic. Research shows that the repetitive motion of fiber work reduces anxiety. Research shows all kinds of ways in which fiber art and fiber work is really good for us and in processing stress and anxiety, even trauma. And now I'd like to quickly show you another one of my students from this past spring. This student is one of my transgender students, and he decided to focus on transformation and metamorphosis as part of his 4 fiber arts projects that told a developing story over the course of the semester. On the right, you see his needle felted hood, and he chose to do his hood focused on his dog, because during the pandemic, one of the strong feelings that he had was that of isolation and loneliness. And so he crocheted the collar for the dog, and blue is his favorite color. And then he felted the hood, and it just turned out wonderful. And after our final critique, we decided that some dog tags from his dog, maybe some old ones, and a leash hanging from it would really make this come to life. On the left is really one of the most meaningful pieces that I have seen one of my students do. This wall hanging tells a story of transformation of my transgendered student. And the various symbols on here, the dragonfly is a representative of transgender. And so is the pink and blue as colors representative of being transgendered. And these little bottles hanging here are my student's testosterone bottles that he's been giving himself to make his transition. So there was all kinds of symbolism on this wall hanging. Next, I want to show you a few projects, and we're going to move pretty quickly through them. The first one I call the storyboard project, and I've been doing this for about 10 years with students. Really, we all do some form of artwork like this, or most of us do, but I want to tell you about the process of the storyboard. I've done the storyboard with school staff, with faculty at my university. I've done them in professional development with art teachers and other teachers. I've done them with ESL students, recent immigrants, refugee students, summer camp programs for various students, and in school art programs. And I've done them with my university pre-service art education students and the elementary ed students that I taught at my previous university in an art course as well. The process is really pretty simple. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. The first step is the students choose one color. Now, you could do this in multiple colors with your advanced art students and art teachers, but for younger students and doing it with faculty that are not artists, if they mix colors, things start to turn brown. So I learned early on to have a monochromatic scheme, and I could also teach students about color and tint and shade. So the idea is that they paint the color across the middle third, and then they paint the shade along the bottom and the tint at the top, basically. And so we have a monochromatic lesson we can learn from this. We have a color, tint, and shade lesson we can learn from this. And we have a foreground, midground, background lesson we can learn. After painting the background, the students then complete a worksheet where they come up with simple symbols that represent their past, present, and future, like repeating patterns you would see on gift wrap paper. And the students write an artist statement for each phase of this. So they've already written an artist statement on the color they chose and why. Now they're going to write one on the three symbols and what they mean. The next step is for students to choose 5 words that represent whatever aspect of the project you want it to represent. So again, I might have students do 5 words that represent past, present, and future. I might have students do 5 words each that represent something going on currently. I might have them do 5 words each that represent life before the pandemic, life during the pandemic, and life as we come out of the pandemic. You could do a lot of different word themes for them to do. And then depending on the age of the student, you can have them do various kinds of hand lettering to make the words. It's good to do them small because you're going to be putting a lot on the board. You can see this student did some very large ones and she got them on, but have them do their words and do quite a few of them very small so that there's room to get them all on the storyboard. Before mounting the words, you need to take their photo or do a digital photography lesson with them and have them take their photos and print them off. And then you can simply Mod Podge the photos onto the storyboards. Or if you want to do something like use Mod Podge for a photo transfer technique, that would be a really nice way to add the photography too. And then you could add a lesson about photography transfer methods. Or you can just cut the photos out and Mod Podge them on. And have them do all of this, put a final coat of Mod Podge on it, let it dry, and have them write their 5 artist statements for the project along the way. So their thoughts are developing while they're making the project. You could attach all kinds of themes to this. What's on your mind? Who are you? What do you think about? I think this would be a fantastic project to do to help process the pandemic when we all start school in the fall. And you could do this digitally on the computer. You could do this in a variety of ways. You could do this on construction paper. But this is a project that I think my own research has shown that all kinds of healing happens by the participants in this project. I did this one during COVID as this was at the beginning. This was probably in April of 2020. And I did this one as a way to just process what was coming and what was going on at the time. And there were some simple instructions for that, which we posted in the online art teachers Facebook group. And this project is the story squares that I showed you at the beginning when I showed you my student's frog in her throat. And these are some of the story squares that my students did this year. And I just want to point out a few to you. I thought this student did a very minimalistic piece where she just depicted the black and white of life in the pandemic. And it was symbolic for various reasons. And then the tulle mask I thought was stunning. This student chose to focus on how love got her through the pandemic and her relationship with her husband. And here you can just see another view of some of the story squares. And this one, I like the view you see of it here. This student chose to focus on the election, and this is sort of him screaming out of his mouth to vote. This was mine, and I'm going to show it to you because I think it's really an example that you could use with your students. So on the front, you see my transfer photo that I've already told you about, where I used the prepackaged sheets that run through your inkjet printer. I used the one that irons on, printed my photo, cut it out, ironed it on, and then I used various kinds of embellishment of improvisational embroidery all over it. And then in and around that, I wrote just some very positive thoughts about living life during the pandemic. And on the back side, I just wrote a message about the difficulties of the pandemic. And I added some trim as I hand sewed it together. I've already shown you the hoods that two of my students did. I just want to quickly show you some of the other hoods that my students made. And if you have never done needle felting with your students, it is not hard to do. It's actually really creative and so easy to do and doesn't involve water and spilling water and getting paint on clothing. So that's one nice thing about doing needle felting in school. But the difficult thing about doing needle felting in school are the big needles, the hand needles that you use to punch the wool into the wool backing. And so be careful if you decide to do this. I'm not sure I would do needle felting with students under the age of 4th grade. And here you see a few more hoods that the students did. This student's story was on the right, was about feminism. That was her developing story. The student in the middle, she focused on just being quirky and just liking to have fun with her art making and loving color. And this student had a beautiful organic thing going here. And this was my hood, and mine was done as an exemplar. I wanted to show my students how they could really reach on this project. And so this is a personal piece I did for myself. But on the outside, you see a lot of needle felting and improvisational embroidery, a lot of hand embroidered words and the use of tulle and yarns in different ways. And on the inside, you see words that I've hand embroidered. The outside of this hood represented the me that I showed the world during the pandemic, and the inside represented those thoughts during the pandemic that I kept to myself, those more difficult thoughts. And I just want to show you this real quickly. So I'd like to take a video of this piece because the photographs really don't show the size and proportion of it. So I'm just going to back up here and you can see my wagon and my bag, and you can see how tall the piece is. It's on a form that I made on a wood base with a large black dowel rod, and there is a skull that is holding it a plastic skull that's been painted different colors. The inside represents what I kept to myself during COVID, my private thoughts, words that represent how I felt during COVID. And these words are all hand-stitched, except for these, which are written, but all these words are hand-stitched and they fill the whole inside. And then the exterior of the hood represents the bright, colorful, positive, peppy person that I tried to show. There are probably 50 hand-stitched words all over the outside. They circle all the way around. Some are extending from these draped pieces that are woven. These are even yarns woven into the tulle. And then here we have a needle felted hood, and it's full of improvisational embroidery on top of the needle felting, but there's birds and flowers. The birds are brilliant with lots of colors, as are the flowers. There's trim that I embroidered all along the opening of the hood. And so the outside represents the positive person that I tried to be during COVID. I want to back up to this slide for just a minute because perhaps you might do needle felting with your students. I want to tell you about an experience I had one day with a lot of paper that had been trimmed off of brilliant, fun colors of inkjet paper for the school copy machine. I guess a teacher wanted perfect 8x8 squares, and so they'd cut off a couple of inches in the teacher workroom, and they threw all the colored strips away. And I walked into the workroom and I saw hundreds of these maybe 2-inch colored strips of paper, 2x8 inch. And I gathered them all up, took them back to the art room, and I used them on what I called Fun Friday, where my students just got to make. I would put out anything I could think of or wanted to put out, and there would be no instructions. It was total choice, and they could just really think and use their artistic minds to make and create. And one of the boys took those strips of paper and made what I would kind of liken to those fun ski hats that people wear when they go snow skiing, that kind of have all the colors and bells and whistles and they hang all over. Remind me a little bit of a court jester's hat or something like that. He made a really fun hat out of the paper scraps, and all of a sudden it caught on and every student in the room was doing it. And I wish I had a photo of that to show you, but it is one of the truly most memorable moments of my art teaching career. And it's all because I gathered some scrap paper that was being thrown away in the teacher's workroom. I'd like to show you the fourth project for my fiber students last spring, and that was story clothing, where they finished the story they'd been telling all semester with a piece of clothing. And this student's topic had been feminism, and she chose to hone in on strong females on the back of her jacket and symbolism on the front representing that. This was my jacket, and I made this probably a year ago, and before this was even a project in my class, but I hand painted it. I used that same ink jet printer transfer paper that you iron on, and I printed various photos. I've got George O'Keeffe, Rumi, flowers, some quotes, poems I typed out and wrote on, and then I painted words on, and I embellished it, and I sewed embellishment on, as you can see here. I think that expressing our stories on clothing is something that's really unique and fun for students to do. And there's the added element that they get to wear it or give it to someone to wear. And who knows, it might even turn into a business. You could use garments you get at Goodwill and see what your students could do with them in class. This was also a piece of embellished clothing that I did this past spring. This is needle felted, It has improvisational embroidery, and it also has acrylic painting on it and some quotes that are written on with Sharpies over the acrylic paint, and lots of symbolic embellishments sewn on, little charms that represented each of the students in my fibers class, things that were symbolic to me. The outside represented the me that I showed the world during the pandemic, and the inside were literally my thoughts about the pandemic. Next, I want to show you this project. This is not my project. Ted Ettinger shared this on social media, and he actually did this project for the first time at Melody Weintraub's workshop at TAEA's conference. But Ted called this talking heads, and the idea was to use styrofoam heads and have students create themselves and then write some thoughts that were coming out of their minds and even attach those to the actual head. This was one Melody did as an example for her workshop, and I want to thank Ted and Melody for giving me permission today to share their brilliant work as art teachers with you. And so you see here that this has been painted and collaged, and meaning has been attached to it for teachers at this workshop she led. And then this is Ted's piece that he did at Melody's workshop. And you can see some of the teachers' pieces here, and Ted did a turtle on his. And then Ted took this project he learned from Melody and turned it into his Talking Heads project that he did with teachers in a professional development this summer. The styrofoam heads would be a little bit expensive to do with your students, but perhaps as an advanced art project or an art club project, this would be a great way to process thoughts this coming fall, which is the whole point of the session. Something else you could do, I have a styrofoam heat knife, not the cheap ones you buy from your local hobby store, but you can actually order more industrial quality heat guns. And it's one of my absolute most favorite tools that I've had for 25 years. And you could literally cut these styrofoam heads in half, and they could do half a head, which would reduce the cost. Next, I want to show you a project by one of our OATK12 team leaders. And if you're watching this at a session besides the Online Art Teachers K-12 Summer Conference, OATK12 is a shorter way of me saying the Online Art Teachers K-12 Facebook group. This group was a service project created for teachers by teachers during the pandemic, and to help us get through hybrid and remote teaching and just all the changes we had to make in art education. Jane is one of our team leaders in the group, and Jane really just exploded with Google Draw this year, and she's our keynote speaker, one of our keynote speakers in this conference. And so go to our Facebook page and search her name and look at all the brilliant curriculum she has shared with you using Google Draw. And I hope you watch her session either today or later on when you can. But I specifically pulled out Jane's post and this teacher's post from Online Art Teachers K-12, because you see two different ways of doing self-portraits. And I really like them both. And I know Jane uses Google Draw with hers, and Mel used Google Draw with hers, but yet you see two totally different ways of applying that. So enjoy using Google Draw with your students and see where it goes. And we could even have some words and thoughts coming out of these. We could ask for the same symbolism in this that I asked for in the digital storyboards. We could do artist statements and get them to talk to us more about what's going on in their thoughts. I also want to share with you an artist that I absolutely love. Leslie Wolstenholme is from England, and she is a multimedia artist who does all kinds of things, but she has started doing this iPad art. And one thing that I really like about this is, in a way, it kind of reminds me of Kehinde Wiley's work with these floral backgrounds, these organic botanical backgrounds. And so my thought is we could do this self-portraiture in the Kehinde Wiley and Leslie Wolstenholme style, and we could do something along these lines, but we could ask for this symbolism to represent different things. Maybe the clothing they're wearing to represent something. The background could be divided into thirds like the storyboard, and could be asked to represent or be symbolic of different things. We could have them add words, or again, in the artist statement, they could do their verbal narrative of their piece. But I want you to be familiar with her because I just love her work. And here is some of her fiber art and the little people art. And we could easily do this with scraps of fabric in our class and needle and thread. I think it's so good to teach students how to use needle and thread. And you'll find that hardly any of them know how to thread a needle, even if they're 20 years old. So there are lots of skills that come out of this, but of course, this could also be done with construction paper and embellished papers. And then here is more information about her. She does have a website. It's right here. She's on Instagram. She has a Facebook page called Vintage Homespun, so you can learn more about her. And I love this because I easily see this becoming a symbolic story where students are asked to add different components to this through the symbols they use. Next, I want to share with you Nate Williams inspired projects. Nate Williams is an artist from the United States, and he is really into incredible graphic art. I am someone that is drawn to color. My home is full of bright colors. I dress in bright colors. I'm happier when I'm surrounded by bright colors. And when I look at Nate Williams' work, I am so happy. I love everything about it. So again, here we see some portraiture, correct? Faces, words. Again, these are ways that we can give our students pathways to process what they're feeling when school starts in August and the next few months of the next school year. Let them process their thoughts through portraiture, through self-portraiture, and through the symbolism of the symbols and colors they use, the words they use, and artist statements. And what you're doing is giving them a place to say what they might need to say, as we talked about at the beginning of this session. This is a Nate Williams inspired project done by someone, and this is from Art Project for Kids. And this is a fabulous video that is on YouTube by this wonderful art teacher where he talks about Nate Williams, and you would want this video. This is Mr. B, and this video is called Nate Williams Style Self-Portraits, Creativity with Mr. B, Episode 8. I highly recommend this video for your younger students. And let's just talk for a minute and let's talk about identity. I've been thinking about this word identity for a while, and well, it's actually been a part of my research for a long time, but I've been thinking about it a good bit during June and July of 21 this summer. Are we going to be the same teachers we were before the pandemic? I don't know. If we get to teach in a non-pandemic world, will we be the same? Are our students going to be the same? I'm just not sure. We can each ponder this question in our own way. As I've thought this summer about all of this pandemic, about teaching during a pandemic, about my students' emotions during the pandemic, about my own, even our numbness, where some days we just put one foot in front of the other and kept going, I'm beginning to see that I am not going to be, let me say that again, I'm beginning to see that I am not going to be the same person in my future that I was prior to the pandemic. I'm kind of holding my breath and trying to wait out what that means. I'm still processing it. I have come to the conclusion that art projects that are designed to tell story, to express our identity, to express our thoughts and emotions are ways for us all to process what we've been through. Perhaps you do this with your students, or in your personal time, you do it for you, or you make exemplars for your students. You benefit from the exercise yourself, or maybe you lead some staff development sessions of art making and give your colleagues a chance to process their emotions and thoughts as school starts this year. One thing I am sure of is that if we examine what is going on in our hearts and our minds, and we share it even with one person who sees it or hears it, the healing begins. Remember, research shows this. How do I know this? I know this from work I have done with refugee children and art. I saw this happen with my own eyes, and what was someone else's research on healing became part of my own research. For the last 7 years, I have prepared future art teachers, majoring in art education. This past year, I witnessed seniors who didn't have the senior year they thought they would have. I witnessed my art ed students not get to go into schools to do their field experiences in their fall methods course. I witnessed these same students do student teaching with only limited time in school art programs prior to student teaching because of COVID. And I saw some of the best that is inside of our young adults, our future teachers. I saw some of the absolute best. One student teacher that I was so proud of was Madeline. Her parents are both teachers, and she's very comfortable in schools. She's an amazing artist herself, but she is also so grounded as a human being. I know the semester was hard for her. I know the regimen in the school was hard for her. She handled it all with such professionalism and dignity. I want to share these next 3 slides with you of projects her high school students did. What impressed me the most when I would go observe her is that she was using SEL. She was using a holistic approach. She was using a whole child approach right in front of my eyes. Students had broad parameters for their projects, but they had so much free choice to tell their own stories through their art making. She asked her diverse students who were multicultural and multilingual to share their identity and their stories in various ways. And in the midst of this, she taught them such media skill and technique, and I was impressed. She did many things besides portraiture and self-portraiture, but I was really drawn to those projects. Because of teachers like Madeline, because of young people who get what art can do, I am certain that art education is in good hands. And I'm certain that our students will have opportunity to explore their biopsychosocial selves, their social emotional selves, their holistic selves, and the whole child that exists within them. I want to conclude this presentation with some research on self-portraiture by a photographer and photography educator. Nunez wrote, during a self-portrait session, we can start a dialogue between our thinking mind and our gut to draw from an inexhaustible source of meanings which must be expressed. The self-portrait can be incredibly empowering. By forcing us into the now, it can help us perceive and express our essential humanity in a photograph. The decision to represent oneself can provide what is termed here a state of grace, the feeling of centeredness that occurs in moments of creative work in which the emotions are naturally retained because our higher self is in command. So today, I end with this thought. In and through art education, when we tell our stories and tales through traditional, digital, and tradigital means, we let our higher selves take over and we become the heroines or the heroes of our own stories instead of the victims. Let's be ready for August of 2021. Let's have art projects that promote hope, honesty, and healing ready to go.